Rain pounded against the tinted windows of Alexander Morgan's corner office. 50 floors below, a small figure huddled beneath a flimsy umbrella next to a homemade lemonade stand. Something about her determination pierced through his carefully constructed world of spreadsheets and acquisitions. When was the last time he'd shown such resilience? Stepping into the downpour, Alexander approached the girl, offering to buy her entire stock. As she beamed and reached for her phone to calculate the total, he froze. There on her screen, his own face smiling at a charity event from years ago, a version of himself he barely recognized anymore. Could this chance encounter with a determined young entrepreneur be the wake-up call he needed to remember what truly matters? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Alexander Morgan straightened his Italian silk tie and gazed out at the Manhattan skyline, partially obscured by the gathering storm clouds. His corner office on the 50th floor of Morgan Innovations Tower offered panoramic views that most people only saw in movies. But after 15 years as CEO, the view had become just another backdrop to endless meetings and acquisition calls. Mr. Morgan, the board is waiting in the conference room. His executive assistant, Eleanor, stood at the doorway, her posture perfect as always. Thank you, Eleanor. Tell them 5 minutes. Alexander didn't turn from the window, his eyes drawn to the framed magazine cover on his credenza. Businessman of the Year, it proclaimed in bold letters above a younger version of himself. 5 years ago. His smile had been genuine then, when Morgan Innovations was still making waves with their community-focused approach. The dust on the frame didn't escape his notice. He picked up the quarterly report from his desk. Record profits again. The board would be pleased. Yet something felt hollow about the achievement. When had the mission shifted from innovation that improved lives to innovation that improved margins? Your father would have turned 75 today, Eleanor said, quietly, still lingering at the door. Alexander nodded. Eleanor had been with the company since his father's time. She was one of the few who remembered the original Morgan Innovations, before the IPO, before the high-rise, before profit became the only metric that mattered. He would hardly recognize the place now, Alexander murmured, straightening his shoulders. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 8 expectant faces turned toward him, with Victoria Chen, his CFO, already standing by the presentation screen. Alexander, perfect timing, Victoria said. I was just about to walk everyone through the Westridge merger numbers. The merger. 300 jobs would be eliminated for operational efficiency. Local manufacturing moved overseas. Alexander had signed off on the preliminary paperwork last week. The shareholders will be thrilled with these projections, Victoria continued, her sleek presentation showing climbing profit lines. It's our 3rd consecutive record-breaking quarter. Board members nodded approvingly. No one mentioned the AA Community Impact Statement, a report his father had insisted on including in every major decision. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd requested one. There is some concern about public perception, said Howard, the oldest board member and his father's former golf partner. The job losses will generate negative press. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. We've prepared a standard press release emphasizing long-term growth potential. Our PR team will handle any blowback. Thunder rattled the windows as rain began to lash against the glass. Alexander found his attention wandering back to the storm. From this height, the people below were merely specks scurrying for cover. Alexander? Victoria's voice pulled him back. Your thoughts on the timeline? Proceed as planned, he heard himself say. The words felt automatic, detached. Let's wrap this up by end of quarter. Howard frowned slightly, studying Alexander with concern. Your father always said that business decisions should be judged by more than just their effect on the bottom line. My father ran a different company in a different time, Alexander replied, more sharply than he intended. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Alexander rarely invoked his father in board meetings. Well, Victoria said, breaking the silence. The numbers speak for themselves. As the meeting continued, Alexander's gaze drifted back to the window. Through the sheets of rain, he spotted something unusual, a small, colorful stand on the plaza below, a lemonade stand of all things, with a tiny figure stubbornly remaining. At her post, despite the downpour, something about that small act of determination struck him. When was the last time he'd cared that deeply about anything? "Excuse me," he said suddenly, standing up. "There's something I need to attend to." He left the boardroom amid confused glances, ignoring Victoria's protests about the remainder of the agenda. For the first time in years, Alexander Morgan felt the pull of something more important than a meeting. The elevator descended with efficient silence, 50 floors of corporate achievement blurring past. Alexander checked his watch, a Swiss timepiece, worth more than what most of his employees made in a month. He couldn't remember the last time he'd left a board meeting unfinished. Victoria would be furious. The security guard at the lobby desk did a double-take as Alexander strode past without his usual driver or umbrella. "Sir, it's pouring out there." "I'm aware, Thomas." Alexander pushed through the revolving door into the deluge. Rain immediately soaked through his tailored suit. Cold droplets ran down his neck as he crossed the plaza, Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles. Several passers-by stared at the sight of a man in a $3,000 suit walking deliberately into a downpour. The lemonade stand was a humble creation, a folding table with a hand-painted sign protected by a beach umbrella that was clearly losing its battle with the wind. Behind it stood a girl, perhaps 10 or 11, wearing a yellow raincoat and a determined expression. "You're still open for business, I see," Alexander said, approaching the stand. The girl looked up, rain dripping from her hood. "Yes, sir. Would you like some lemonade? I have regular and strawberry." Alexander noted the carefully written menu. On cardstock, protected by plastic sleeves, "Lucy's Legendary Lemonade," it proclaimed in colorful letters, with prices and flavor options meticulously detailed. "Lucy, I presume?" "Yes, sir. Lucy Davis." She extended a small hand with surprising professionalism. Alexander shook it, bemused. Most businesses would close in weather like this. Dad says entrepreneurs don't quit when things get tough. She gestured to her nearly full pitcher. "But it's been a slow day." Something about her earnestness reminded Alexander of himself at that age, selling hand-drawn greeting cards door to door in his father's neighborhood, before spreadsheets and shareholders became his life. "How much for all of it?" he asked suddenly. Lucy's eyes widened. "All of it? Your entire inventory, what would that cost?" She pulled out a small notebook, flipping through rain-spotted pages. "Well, I have 2 full pitchers left, which is 20 glasses. At $2 each, that's—" Her face scrunched in concentration. $40, Alexander supplied automatically. "Plus tax," Lucy added seriously. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You collect tax?" "Dad says every legitimate business has to account for taxes." She pointed to a line on her menu that indeed included tax calculations. "Your father sounds like a wise businessman. He works at the community center now, but he used to have his own construction company before it went out of business." Alexander felt a twinge of something, guilt, empathy, as he reached for his wallet. "I'll take everything you've got." Lucy beamed and reached for her phone to calculate the total with tax. As she pressed the home button, the screen lit up with a wallpaper image that made Alexander freeze. It was him, a younger Alexander Morgan, smiling broadly while cutting a ribbon at some event. He stared at the image, momentarily confused. Lucy noticed his expression. "Oh, that's from when you came to save our community center 3 years ago." She turned the phone toward him proudly. "You donated a whole new playground and computer lab. That's why I wanted to set up here, in front of your building." Alexander struggled to recall the event. There had been so many photo opportunities, so many tax-deductible donations that marketing had arranged. They all blurred together. "You gave a speech about how businesses should help communities grow," Lucy continued enthusiastically. "That's why I'm saving half my profits for the center, just like you said." Alexander felt oddly exposed in the rain, staring at an image of a man who spoke words he no longer lived by. A version of himself he'd somehow left behind. "Here's 50, he said, handing her the bill. "Keep the change for the community center." As Lucy carefully placed the money in a lockbox, Alexander noticed a woman hurrying toward them through the rain, concern evident on her face. "Lucy, what are you doing still out in this weather?" The woman rushed up, clutching an umbrella that had clearly seen better days. "Mom, this is Mr. Morgan," Lucy announced proudly. "He bought all my lemonade." The woman's hurried expression froze as she recognized Alexander. "Mr. Morgan? Alexander Morgan?" Alexander nodded, rain continuing to soak his expensive suit. "Just helping support a fellow entrepreneur. Sarah Davis," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the director at Westside Community Center now. We've actually met before." Alexander searched his memory, but came up empty. "I apologize. I meet a lot of people." "3 years ago," Sarah prompted, "when your company funded our renovation." The event slowly materialized in Alexander's memory. A PR initiative during a more idealistic phase of his leadership. The marketing team had suggested community investments to offset negative press from an earlier round of layoffs. "Of course," he said, though the details remained foggy. Sarah studied him with a mixture of admiration and wariness. "Your donation saved our center. The computer lab you funded has helped dozens of people find jobs." Lucy tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Show him the article, Mom." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a plastic-protected newspaper clipping. "Lucy keeps this with her for inspiration." Alexander took the weathered clipping. There he was, 3 years younger, cutting a ribbon in front of a modest building. The headline read, "Local business leader commits to community renewal." His quote jumped out at him. "At Morgan Innovations, we believe that corporate success and community well-being are inseparable. We don't just build products, we help build futures." Alexander stared at the words. Had he actually believed that? Or was it just something the PR team had crafted? He couldn't remember. "Your speech changed our lives," Sarah said quietly. "My husband had just lost his business. You talked about how failures can be new beginnings, how communities and businesses need to support each other." Alexander vaguely recalled the speech, written by his communications director, delivered with practiced sincerity. He'd given variations of it at dozens of events. Lucy was so inspired, she started her first lemonade stand the next week, Sarah continued. "She's been running one every summer since, and saving half for the community center," Lucy added proudly. "Just like you said businesses should do." Alexander felt a strange hollowness in his chest. This child had taken his words more seriously than he had. She'd built her business model on principles he'd espoused, but no longer practiced. "We were so disappointed when Morgan Innovations stopped its community partnership program last year," Sarah said, a slight edge in her voice. Alexander frowned. "We stopped the program?" The new liaison said the company was refocusing on core business objectives. Sarah explained, using air quotes. That would have been Victoria's initiative. Cost-cutting measures to improve quarterly performance. Alexander had signed off on it without much thought. "I didn't realize," he began, then stopped. What could he say? That he'd been too busy counting profits to notice what his company was cutting? That the community values he'd once championed had become inconvenient to the bottom line? Lucy, oblivious to the tension, happily packed up her lemonade stand. "Mom, Mr. Morgan paid $50. That's $25 for my college fund and $25 for the center." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. "That's wonderful, honey." She turned back to Alexander. "Thank you for supporting her little business. It means more than you know." As they prepared to leave, Lucy handed Alexander a business card handmade, slightly smudged from the rain, with Lucy's legendary lemonade written in careful letters. "For next time," she said brightly. Alexander tucked the card into his pocket, feeling its dampness against his fingers as he watched them walk away. Alexander's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of an exclusive Upper East Side building. The Kakati. Dorman barely hid his surprise at Alexander's drenched appearance as he strode through the marble lobby. "Rough day, Mr. Morgan?" Alexander merely nodded, leaving wet footprints on the elevator's plush carpet. Inside his apartment, he peeled off his ruined suit and took a hot shower, but the encounter with Lucy and her mother continued to haunt him. He wrapped himself in a monogrammed robe and wandered to his study, a space he rarely used except for late-night calls with overseas investors. A photograph on the bookshelf caught his eye, one he hadn't really looked at in years. Alexander, perhaps 25, standing beside his father at the ribbon cutting of the original Morgan Innovations storefront. Just a small electronics repair shop then, with the ambitious tagline, "Fixing technology, building community." His father, James Morgan, had his arm around Alexander's shoulders, both of them beaming with genuine pride. They'd started with nothing but James's technical expertise and Alexander's business degree. The first 5 years, they'd reinvested every penny of profit back into the business or the neighborhood. Alexander picked up the photo, wiping away a layer of dust. When had he stopped looking at it? Probably around the time the board convinced him to take the company public. His father had opposed the move initially, concerned about shareholder pressure compromising their values. "The moment we answer to Wall Street instead of Main Street, we lose our soul," James had warned. Alexander had overruled him, eager to expand. 6 months later, his father suffered a fatal heart attack, leaving Alexander to guide the company alone. Within a year, Morgan Innovations had moved from their neighborhood location to a gleaming downtown office. His phone rang, breaking his reverie. His sister's name flashed on the screen. "Rebecca," he answered. "You missed Dad's memorial dinner," she said without preamble. Again, Alexander closed his eyes. The board meeting ran late. It always does. Her voice held years of disappointment. The community center named a room after him today. The people he helped still remember him, even if his company doesn't. That's not fair, Becca, isn't it? When's the last time Morgan Innovations did anything that wasn't about profit margins? Dad built that business to serve people, not shareholders. Alexander's gaze fell on his father's old desk in the corner. He'd kept it more as decoration than anything else, a nod to tradition in an otherwise ultra-modern apartment. "I need to go," he said abruptly. After hanging up, Alexander approached the desk. The key was still where it had always been, taped under the right-hand drawer. Inside, he found his father's journal, bound in worn leather. Alexander hesitated, then opened it to a random page. "Business is a covenant, not just a contract," his father had written. "When we take from a community, its workers, its resources, its support, we must give back more than we take. This isn't charity. It's the only sustainable model for true success." Alexander flipped through more pages, finding detailed notes about employees' families, community projects, and long-term vision that extended beyond quarterly reports. His father had known everyone who worked for him by name, knew their children, their struggles, their dreams. The last entry, dated just a week before his death, felt like a dagger. "Alexander has a brilliant mind for business, but I fear he's losing sight of why we started this company. Profit without purpose is a hollow victory." Alexander closed the journal, a tightness in his chest. He walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, a little girl was counting her day's earnings, faithfully setting aside half for others, just as his father would have done. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Emergency board call tomorrow, 7 a.m. Need to discuss your abrupt departure. Stockholders nervous." Alexander set the phone down without responding and returned to his father's desk, pulling out more papers. Among them, he found the original Morgan Innovations mission statement in his father's handwriting: to create technology that serves humanity, profits that serve community, and a business that serves a purpose greater than itself. When had those words become just empty marketing copy? Alexander arrived at the office earlier than usual the next morning, his father's journal tucked inside his briefcase. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the skyline in hues of gold and rose that few in the Morgan Innovations Tower ever bothered to notice. Eleanor looked up in surprise as he passed her desk. "You're early. The board call isn't for another hour." "I need to review some things first," Alexander replied. "Could you pull our community engagement reports for the past 5 years and the original impact assessments for the Westridge merger?" Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "The community reports haven't been compiled since we dissolved the Corporate Social Responsibility Department last year." "We dissolved an entire department." Alexander stopped in his tracks. "Yes, sir. It was part of Ms. Chen's efficiency restructuring." Eleanor studied him with concern. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Morgan?" Alexander didn't answer, continuing into his office. On his desk sat the merger contract with Westridge Technologies, nearly 100 pages of legalese that would consolidate Morgan Innovations' market position while eliminating an entire division of workers. His signature was required on the final page. The pen felt unusually heavy in his hand. A sharp knock preceded Victoria's entrance. As always, she was impeccably dressed, not a hair out of place. "There you are," she said briskly. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. What happened? In that board meeting, we had 6 more items on the agenda." "I needed some air," Alexander replied, still studying the contract. Victoria frowned. "You left a board meeting for air. The Westridge representatives are getting nervous. They're questioning our commitment." "Maybe they should," Alexander murmured. "Excuse me?" Alexander looked up. "Have we done a community impact assessment for this merger?" Victoria stared at him. "Oh, what?" "Alexander, we haven't done those in years. They're superfluous." They were. "My father's non-negotiable requirement for any major business decision." "Your father ran a much smaller company in a different era," Victoria said, echoing his own words from yesterday. "We've evolved beyond caring about consequences." Alexander pushed the contract away. 300 people will lose their jobs with this merger, and our shareholders will see a 15% increase in value, Victoria countered. "That's our primary responsibility." "Is it?" Alexander opened his briefcase and withdrew his father's journal. "Our original mission statement suggests otherwise." Victoria's expression hardened. "The board call is in 45 minutes. They're expecting answers about your behavior yesterday and confirmation that the merger is proceeding as planned. And if I want to reconsider, then the board will need to reconsider your position as CEO." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I've supported you for years, Alexander, but this company exists to generate profit. Everything else is secondary." After she left, Alexander sat in silence, turning his father's journal over in his hands. Through the glass walls of his office, he could see employees arriving, each making their way to cubicles and offices where they would spend the next 9 hours of their lives. How many of them knew about the company's original values? How many would be affected by the Westridge merger? His desk phone buzzed. "Mr. Morgan, I found something," Eleanor said. "The last community impact report from 3 years ago. It includes the Westside Community Center project." "Send it in." The report arrived moments later, complete with photographs of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. There he was, smiling beside Sarah Davis and other community members. The report detailed projected outcomes: job training for low-income residents, after-school programs, senior services. On the last page, a handwritten note from his father, added shortly before his death. "This is what Morgan Innovations stands for. Never forget." Alexander checked his watch. 30 minutes until the board call. He picked up the merger contract again, flipping to the section detailing the operational efficiencies, corporate speak for layoffs and closures. The Westridge facility scheduled for closure was in the same neighborhood as the West Side Community Center. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His company was about to devastate the very community they had once promised to support. The board call had been contentious. Alexander's request to delay the Westridge merger for a community impact assessment was met with incredulity from most members. Only Howard, his father's old friend, had offered tentative support. "We'll give you 1 week," the board chairman had finally conceded. "But this merger is too important to derail over sentimentality." Now Alexander found himself back at the plaza outside his building. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, clear day. Lucy's lemonade stand was set up in the same spot, her yellow sign fluttering in the gentle breeze. She spotted him immediately. "Mr. Morgan, you came back." "I said I would," Alexander replied, approaching the stand. Today he'd left his suit jacket behind, sleeves rolled up in an uncharacteristically casual appearance. "Would you like strawberry today? I made it fresh this morning." "Sounds perfect." Alexander surveyed her operation with newfound interest. The stand was impressively organized, separate coolers for each flavor, a cash box with compartments for different denominations, even a small tablet for digital payments. "Your business looks quite professional," he observed. Lucy beamed. "I'm expanding. Mom helped me set up a Square account so people can pay with cards." She handed him a printed business plan, complete with hand-drawn graphs and projections. "I'm hoping to save enough by end of summer to open a second location at the community center." Alexander studied the meticulous document. Despite the childish handwriting, the business fundamentals were sound. Inventory costs, pricing strategy, growth projections. "This is impressive work, Lucy. Mom says if I keep good records now, I'll be ready to run a real business someday." She hesitated. "Like you." The comparison made Alexander uncomfortable. "Where is your mother today?" "At the center. They're having an emergency meeting about funding." Lucy's expression clouded. "Some big company is closing down and they're worried about what happens to all the families." Alexander's stomach tightened. "Westridge Technologies?" Lucy nodded. "A lot of the parents from my school work there. Mom says the center will need to help them find new jobs." The human cost of his merger decision suddenly had faces attached to it. Not just Lucy and Sarah, but countless families who would struggle in its wake. "Could you show me the community center sometime?" Alexander asked impulsively. Lucy's eyes widened. "Really? You want to see it?" "I'd like to understand more about what they do there." "We could go now." Lucy began packing up her stand with practiced efficiency. "Tuesdays are slow anyway, and Mom's there all day." 20 minutes later, Alexander found himself walking alongside Lucy through a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. Children played in small parks between apartment buildings. Elderly residents sat on stoops, nodding greetings as they passed. "Everyone knows everyone here," Lucy explained. "That's what Mom says makes a real community." The West Side Community Center occupied a renovated former warehouse. A playground, the one funded by Morgan Innovations, filled the side yard with colorful equipment. The computer lab bearing his company's name was visible through front windows. Inside, the center hummed with activity. Senior citizens played cards in one corner. Teenagers worked at computers. Young mothers attended a resume workshop. Sarah looked up from a meeting table, her surprise evident as she spotted Alexander with her daughter. "Mr. Morgan? This is unexpected." "Lucy was kind enough to show me around," Alexander explained. "I wanted to see the center in person." Sarah excused herself from her meeting and approached them. "Lucy, why don't you help Mr. Rodriguez with the after-school snacks?" After Lucy bounced away, Sarah turned to Alexander, her expression guarded. What brings the CEO of Morgan Innovations to our humble center? I'm reconsidering some business decisions, Alexander said carefully. I'd like to understand how they might impact this community. Sarah studied him, weighing his sincerity. Is this about Westridge? We've heard rumors about the merger. Alexander nodded slowly. I'd like to hear your perspective on what that would mean for the families here. You really want to know? Sarah asked, surprise evident in her voice. I do. This is highly unusual, Victoria said, pacing Alexander's office the following morning. You want to present a community initiative at the same meeting where we're supposed to finalize the Westridge merger? Alexander nodded, reviewing his hastily prepared presentation. After spending yesterday afternoon with Sarah, touring the community center and meeting residents who would be affected by the merger, he'd worked late into the night on an alternative proposal. The board won't like this, Victoria warned. Shareholders, expect that merger to close this quarter. I'm still the CEO, Alexander reminded her, and my father's principles are still embedded in our corporate charter, even if we've ignored them lately. Victoria picked up the quarterly report from his desk. These record profits weren't achieved by prioritizing community over shareholders. And yet my father built this company on exactly that principle. Alexander straightened his tie. It's time to see if the board remembers what Morgan Innovations stands for. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander concluded his presentation. Instead of advancing the Westridge merger, he'd proposed a radical alternative, a community partnership, program modeled after Lucy's lemonade stand principles. You want to allocate $15 million to a lemonade initiative? The board chairman's voice dripped with skepticism. Based on a child's business model? A child who understands something we've forgotten, Alexander replied. That sustainable business means investing in community, not just extracting profit from it. He displayed the side-by-side financial projections. The Westridge merger provides a short-term stock bump but destroys community infrastructure. This initiative creates sustainable growth while strengthening our consumer base. Victoria, surprisingly, had remained silent throughout his presentation, studying the financials with an unreadable expression. This is your father talking, not a CEO, one board member said dismissively. James was a brilliant engineer, but a naive businessman. Was he? Alexander clicked to a new slide showing Morgan Innovations' long-term performance. Our growth was actually more consistent and sustainable when we followed his community-centered model. The spikes and volatility began when we shifted to a pure profit focus. Howard, the eldest board member, leaned forward. I remember when we built relationships instead of just transactions. James understood that goodwill is a balance sheet asset that doesn't show up in quarterly reports. Goodwill doesn't satisfy shareholders, countered another board member. We have fiduciary responsibilities. To whom? Alexander challenged. Our charter explicitly states our responsibility to multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders. The debate continued for nearly an hour. Alexander could see he was losing ground with most of the board. Their concerns were predictable. Market expectations, competitor advantages, shareholder revolt. Finally, Victoria spoke up. The numbers in this community initiative are actually quite interesting. All eyes turned to her in surprise. While the immediate return is lower, the risk profile is significantly better. The Westridge merger has substantial downside potential we haven't fully assessed. Alexander shot her a grateful glance. Her support, however calculated, might sway enough. Votes, I propose a compromise, Victoria continued. A scaled pilot program of the Lemonade Initiative. She pronounced the name with slight distaste. 5 million initially, with metrics-based expansion if successful. The chairman frowned. And the Westridge merger? Delayed, not cancelled. Victoria said smoothly. Pending results of our community impact assessment. Alexander held his breath as the chairman called for a vote. It passed by a single vote, with Howard casting the deciding ballot. 5 million, Alexander, the chairman warned, and we expect measurable results, not just feel-good stories. After the board dispersed, Victoria lingered. Don't mistake my support for sentimentality, she said quietly. I ran the numbers. Long term, your proposal has merit, but the board's patience will be limited. Alexander nodded. Thank you, regardless of your reasons. What made you change? Of course, so dramatically, she asked. You've approved dozens of similar mergers before. Alexander pulled out Lucy's handmade business card. Sometimes we need to see our reflection in someone else's eyes to remember who we're supposed to be. A lemonade stand, Sarah repeated, her expression caught between amusement and confusion. Alexander, Lucy, and Sarah sat at a worn table in the community center's cafeteria, surrounded by blueprints and planning documents. A week had passed since the board meeting, and Alexander had returned with official approval for the pilot program. Not literally, Alexander explained. It's a metaphor for what Lucy's business represents. Local entrepreneurship with community reinvestment built into the model. Lucy beamed, clearly thrilled to have her small business serve as inspiration for a corporate initiative. I told Mr. Morgan how I save half my profits for the center. He said big companies should do that too. Sarah's skepticism remained evident. And your board approved this? A pilot version, Alexander admitted. $5 million to start. $5 million? Sarah's eyes widened. That's substantial. Alexander spread out the architectural plans he'd brought. Part of it would renovate and expand this center. The rest would create a grant program for local small businesses with an emphasis on those that include community reinvestment in their business models. Like Lucy's lemonade stand, but for grown-ups, Lucy added helpfully. As Alexander outlined the details, he watched Sarah's expression shift from skepticism to cautious interest. By the time he finished, she was asking pointed, practical questions about implementation and oversight. This could make a real difference, she acknowledged. But why the sudden change of heart? Morgan Innovations hasn't been involved with the community for years. Alexander hesitated, glancing at Lucy, who was busy drawing her vision for the expanded center. Let's just say I was reminded of why my father started the company in the first place. Over the next few hours, residents began filtering in as word spread about the planning session. A retired architect offered suggestions for the renovation. A former business owner provided insights on what local entrepreneurs would need most. We should call it the Lemonade Initiative, Lucy insisted, and the name stuck despite Alexander's half-hearted attempts to suggest something more corporate. By evening, the cafeteria walls were covered with ideas. Alexander had removed his tie hours ago, his sleeves rolled up as he discussed logistics with community members he would have never met otherwise. You're different than I expected, Sarah commented during a quiet moment, handing him a cup of actual lemonade that Lucy had made for the meeting. Different from what? The corporate shark who cuts ribbons for photo ops but doesn't remember the communities he claims to help, she said frankly. Alexander winced. That's fair. I became that person for a while. What changed? He looked across the room where Lucy was earnestly explaining her business model to a group of teenagers interested in starting their own ventures. She reminded me of someone I used to be, someone who believed business could do more than just generate profits. The next morning, Alexander surprised his executive team by bringing Lucy and Sarah to the Morgan Innovations Tower for an official launch meeting. The contrast between Lucy's wide-eyed excitement at the gleaming corporate headquarters and the executive's initial condescension was stark. But as Lucy confidently presented her business model, complete with hand-drawn charts, showing her profit-sharing approach, the condescension gradually transformed into reluctant respect. We'll need volunteers from every department, Alexander announced. People willing to share their expertise with community entrepreneurs. To his surprise, hands began raising across the conference room. I could help with marketing plans, offered the marketing director. I'd be happy to teach basic accounting, added someone from finance. By meeting's end, 20 employees had volunteered their professional skills. Alexander caught Eleanor smiling from the doorway. Your father would be proud, she said quietly, as the room emptied. That afternoon, the first local news crew arrived at the community center to cover the launch. As Alexander stood awkwardly before the cameras, Lucy tugged at his sleeve. You should smile more, she whispered, like in the picture on my phone. Alexander found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in longer than he could remember. And when he spoke about the Lemonade Initiative to the reporters, the words came from somewhere authentic, not from a prepared PR statement. Sometimes, he told the cameras, the best business lessons come from unexpected teachers. Alexander stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing details he'd overlooked for years. Grey at his temples, lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, something he'd been doing more frequently these past 2 weeks. His morning routine had changed subtly. Instead of checking stock prices immediately upon waking, he found himself reading community center emails. Rather than his usual car service, he'd taken to walking part of the way to work, noticing the city and its people in a way he hadn't for decades. Today, he'd made another small change. From his dresser drawer, he retrieved an old wristwatch. His father's timepiece, a modest Timex with a worn leather band. Alexander had worn expensive Swiss watches for years, status symbols more than timekeepers. But this morning, the simple watch felt right. His phone rang as he fastened it. Rebecca, I saw you on the news, his sister said without preamble. The Lemonade Initiative. Alexander tensed, expecting criticism. It's just a pilot program. It's exactly what Dad would have done, Rebecca said, her voice softening. I almost didn't recognize you in that interview. You seemed different. I'm trying to be, he admitted. What happened, Alex? This isn't the same brother who missed Dad's memorial dinner because of a board meeting. Alexander considered how to explain. I met someone who saw me differently than I saw myself. It made me realize how far I drifted from what matters. There was a long pause. Would you like to have dinner this weekend? At my place with the kids. They hardly know there. Uncle, I'd like that, Alexander said, surprised at how much he meant it. At the office, Eleanor handed him his usual morning coffee in a ceramic mug, rather than the disposable cup he'd always used. Part of our new sustainability initiative, she explained. Your father always used a real mug. Alexander nodded, noticing other small changes around the executive floor. The intimidating security guard now greeted employees by name. Meeting rooms, once named for stock exchange symbols, had been rechristened after neighborhoods where the company operated. Victoria approached as he entered his office. The Lemonade Initiative is generating unexpected interest, she reported, tablet in hand. 3 major clients have requested presentations about our community investment model. They have? Apparently, corporate social responsibility is trending. Victoria's tone was dry, but not entirely dismissive. The PR department estimates about 2 million in earned media coverage already. Alexander set down his mug. That's not why we're doing this. No, but it doesn't hurt to track the business benefits, Victoria countered. The board will expect ROI metrics eventually. Later that afternoon, Alexander left the office early, something he never would have done. A month ago, to meet Lucy at her lemonade stand. Mr. Morgan, look! She proudly displayed a new sign. Official partner of the Lemonade Initiative with the Morgan Innovations logo. Very professional, he approved. How's business? Much better since the news stories. Everyone wants to try. The lemonade that inspired a millionaire. She counted out her day's earnings with practiced efficiency. That's $30 for me, $30 for the community fund. Alexander watched her methodical sorting of coins and bills. You know, my father taught me to count change when I was about your age. He said understanding money wasn't about having But about respecting what it could do for others. Your dad sounds smart, like my dad, Lucy said. Do you miss him? The question caught Alexander off guard. Every day, lately, Mum says as long as you remember someone's lessons, they're never really gone. That evening, instead of working late, Alexander drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. He hadn't visited in over a year. The simple headstone read, James Morgan, businessman, father, community builder. Alexander brushed away leaves that had gathered on the stone. I'm trying to remember your lessons, Dad, he said quietly, touching the old wristwatch. It took me a while, but I'm listening now. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, Alexander made a silent promise to the man who had taught him that business was about more than bottom lines. It was about the people whose lives you touched along the way. Mr. Morgan, you should see this. Eleanor's usually composed demeanor showed strain as she placed the financial report on his desk. Alexander scanned the document, his stomach tightening. The company's stock had dropped 7% since the Lemonade Initiative announcement and the Westridge merger delay. Hemsworth Capital is requesting an emergency meeting, Eleanor continued. They're our second largest shareholder. Before Alexander could respond, Victoria entered without knocking. The analyst's call went poorly, she reported. They're questioning our strategic redirection and the Westridge delay. The initiative is barely a month old, Alexander protested. We need to give it time. Time is a luxury public companies don't have, Victoria reminded him. Quarterly expectations don't wait for social experiments. Later that morning, Alexander found an unmarked envelope on his desk. Inside was a printout of an email chain between board members, clearly not intended for his eyes. Morgan's midlife crisis is costing shareholders millions, one board member had written. We need to consider leadership alternatives before this sentimentality does permanent damage. Another had responded, agreed. Victoria has the financial discipline the company needs right now. Alexander slipped the printout into his drawer as Victoria entered for their scheduled meeting. He studied her carefully, wondering if she'd been part of the email chain. Hemsworth wants us to reinstate the Westridge merger immediately, she reported. They're threatening to push for board changes if we don't. And what do you think we should do? Alexander asked carefully. Victoria hesitated. The Lemonade Initiative has potential, but its timeline doesn't align with market expectations. We might need to proceed with Westridge in parallel, even though it would devastate the same community we're claiming to help. Business requires difficult decisions, Alexander. You've always understood that. After she left, Alexander called Sarah at the community center. How quickly can we show measurable impact from the initiative? He asked without preamble. These things take time, Sarah replied, her voice tinged with concern. Community building isn't a quarterly deliverable. Is something wrong? Just some corporate pressure, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Any early success stories would be helpful. That afternoon, Alexander visited Lucy's lemonade stand, seeking perspective from his unlikely mentor. It's business. Problems, she asked, noticing his expression. Some people at my company don't believe in what we're doing, he admitted. They think we should focus only on making money, not helping the community. Lucy considered this while carefully measuring lemons for a fresh batch. At school, there's this girl who always wants to change the rules when she's losing. Mum says, some people only care about winning, not how they win. Your mom is a wise woman. She says the hardest right thing is worth more than the easiest wrong thing. Lucy handed him a lemonade. I think that means you should keep doing good stuff even when it's hard. Alexander smiled, despite his worries. Out of the mouths of babes. Returning to his office, he found the board chairman waiting. Alexander, we need to talk, the chairman said gravely. I've called a special board meeting for tomorrow. Hemsworth is pushing for a vote of confidence. A vote of confidence, Alexander repeated, the corporate euphemism for firing a CEO. Your personal project is charming, but it's becoming a distraction. The Westridge deal needs to proceed. After the chairman left, Alexander sat alone in his office as evening shadows lengthened across the city. The framed magazine cover of Businessman of the Year seemed to mock him from the wall. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Saw the stock price. You okay?" Then another message arrived, this one from Lucy. "Made $43 today. Half for me, half for community. That's the rule." Alexander found himself at a crossroads he'd never anticipated. The path to retaining his position was clear. Abandon or scale back the initiative, proceed with the Westridge merger, and return to business as usual. The other path, standing firm on his rediscovered principles, likely meant losing the company. He'd spent his adult life building. His father's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, a quiet reminder of legacy and values that transcended quarterly reports. Alexander opened his drawer and retrieved the leaked email chain, reading it again as the implications sank in. Someone within his executive team was actively working against him, and tomorrow he would face a board that seemed increasingly determined to bring his newfound mission to an abrupt end. Before facing the board, Alexander decided to visit the community center. He needed to remind himself what he was fighting for. The center hummed with more activity than his previous visits. Construction crews worked on the expansion, funded by the first phase of the Lemonade Initiative. The computer lab buzzed with people attending digital skills workshops led by Morgan Innovations IT staff who had volunteered their time. Sarah spotted him and waved him over to a bulletin board covered with colorful cards. "Perfect timing. I was just putting up the latest thank you notes." Alexander examined the handmade cards. One showed a crude drawing of a food truck with "My Dream Coming True" written in childish script. Another, in shaky, elderly handwriting, expressed gratitude for the expanded senior services program. "Eduardo got his food truck last week," Sarah explained, pointing to a photo of a beaming middle-aged man standing proudly beside a small taco truck. "He was laid off 2 years ago and couldn't get financing until our program. Now he's hiring 2 assistants from the neighborhood. And Ms. Jenkins here," she continued, indicating another photo, "started a seamstress training program for immigrant women. They're already getting small contracts from local businesses." As they walked through the center, Sarah introduced him to program participants. Alexander met a former Westridge employee who was developing accounting software for small businesses. A young mother showed him the children's book she was self-publishing with help from a Lemonade Initiative grant. "We've only disbursed about 20% of the funds," Sarah told him, "and already we've helped launch 12 micro-businesses. Each one employs between 1 and 5 people." "How many of them are reinvesting in the community?" Alexander asked. "All of them," Sarah replied with evident pride. "It's a requirement of the grants, but they've embraced it beyond the minimum. Eduardo donates meals to the homeless shelter. The seamstress group is teaching free classes to teenagers. In the center's newly renovated kitchen, Alexander found Lucy helping an elderly woman prepare lunch for the senior program. "Mr. Morgan," Lucy called out, "come see what Mrs. Abernathy taught me." As Lucy demonstrated her newfound culinary skills, Alexander noticed how the older woman beamed with pride at sharing her knowledge. It was a small moment of intergenerational connection that would never appear on a balance sheet, but represented something valuable nonetheless. "Your little lemonade. Partner has been quite the inspiration around here," Mrs. Abernathy told him. "Got my grandson thinking about starting his own business. He's been mowing lawns and putting half aside for college." A local reporter approached as Alexander was leaving the kitchen. "Mr. Morgan, perfect timing. We're doing a follow-up story on the Lemonade Initiative. Can I get a quick interview?" The resulting conversation was unlike any media interaction Alexander had experienced in years. Instead of rehearsed talking points about shareholder value and market position, He found himself speaking genuinely about community resilience and sustainable business models. The program participants aren't just receiving handouts, he explained. They're building enterprises that will continue to grow and give back. It's a sustainable cycle, not a one-time donation. Later, as he prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a folder. I thought you might need this. Inside were testimonials, photographs, and preliminary data on the initiative's impact. Jobs created, new businesses launched, services improved, lives changed. It's not the kind of quarterly report your board might expect, Sarah acknowledged, but it shows real value being created. Alexander studied a group photo of the first grant recipients, their faces alight with possibility. Thank you. This helps more than you know. As he turned to go, he found his path blocked by a tall man with work-roughened hands. Mr. Morgan? I'm Michael Davis, Lucy's father. Alexander recognized Sarah's husband from photographs around the center. It's good to meet you. I worked construction for Westridge before they downsized 3 years ago, Michael said. Started my own small contracting business after, but it's been tough. He hesitated. I just wanted to say, what you're doing here matters. Not just the money, but showing these kids that business can be about more than just profit. He extended his hand, and Alexander shook it firmly. I have to face my board tomorrow, Alexander admitted. They're not all convinced this is the right direction. Then they need to come see what's happening here, Michael replied simply. Some things you have to see to believe. The boardroom fell silent as Victoria finished her presentation. The graphs on the screen told a clear story. Declining stock price, concerned analysts, and nervous investors, all tied to the Westridge merger delay and the Lemonade Initiative. In conclusion, Victoria said, her voice professionally neutral, while the community program has generated positive PR, the financial impacts are concerning. Hemsworth Capital and 3 other major investors have indicated they may reduce their positions if we don't return to our core strategy. Alexander felt 8 pairs of eyes turn to him. He had prepared extensively for this meeting, but facing the collective weight of the board's skepticism was still daunting. Before I respond, he said, I'd like to distribute some additional materials. He passed out the folders Sarah had given him, containing the community impact data and testimonials. The board members flipped through them with expressions ranging from mild interest to obvious impatience. These are heartwarming stories, the chairman said finally, but they don't address the fundamental concerns. Our responsibility is to shareholders. Is it? Alexander stood and walked to the window. Our corporate charter, written by my father, explicitly states that Morgan Innovations has responsibilities to multiple stakeholders: employees, customers, communities, and shareholders. That's idealistic language, not binding direction, one board member countered. Actually, Howard interjected, when we went public, James insisted those principles be incorporated into our legal governance documents. They are, in fact, binding. A murmur ran through the room. Few current board members had been present during the IPO 15 years earlier. Nevertheless, the chairman continued, the Westridge situation requires resolution. Their CEO called me personally yesterday. If we don't move forward by month's end, they'll pursue other options. Victoria nodded. Losing this merger would be a significant strategic setback. Alexander took a deep breath. What if there was a way to restructure the merger that preserved jobs and maintained our community commitments? Victoria frowned. We've explored every angle. The efficiencies come precisely from the consolidation of facilities and workforce. Not every angle, Alexander contradicted. I've been working with the Westside Community Center on an alternative proposal. He outlined a revised plan, repurposing the Westridge facility as an innovation hub for small businesses, including those launched through the Lemonade Initiative. Some Westridge employees would transfer to Morgan Innovations, while others would receive support to start their own ventures within the hub. This approach would cost more initially, he acknowledged, but creates sustainable value and generates tremendous goodwill in a key market. Victoria's expression had grown increasingly troubled. This wasn't authorized. You've been negotiating behind the company's back? I've been exploring alternatives, as is my prerogative as CEO, Alexander replied evenly. The chairman shook his head. This is precisely the concern, Alexander. Your personal project has become an obsession, compromising your business judgment. From his briefcase, the chairman withdrew a document that Alexander instantly recognized, a CEO termination notice. His heart sank. Hemsworth Capital has formally requested a vote of confidence, the chairman announced. They believe a change in leadership is necessary to return the company to its proper focus. The room temperature seemed to drop. Alexander had expected resistance, but not an orchestrated coup. May I see that request? Howard asked. The chairman passed him the letter. Howard studied it, then looked up sharply. This is dated 2 weeks ago, before we had any performance data on the initiative. All eyes turned to Victoria, who maintained her composure. Hemsworth expressed concerns immediately following the announcement. I may have discussed contingency options with them. You've been lobbying for my removal, Alexander said, the betrayal stinging despite his suspicions. I've been protecting this company, Victoria replied without apology. Someone needed to maintain investor confidence while you were playing philanthropist. The chairman cleared his throat. Regardless of timing, we need to address the leadership question. I propose we hold the confidence vote now, followed by consideration of reinstating the original Westridge merger plan. Alexander looked around the table. Most board members avoided his gaze. After everything he'd shared, they were still prepared to discard the initiative and revert to business as usual. Before you vote, he said quietly, I'd like to make one request. Visit the community center. See firsthand what the initiative is accomplishing. If you still want to vote me out afterward, I won't contest it. We don't have time for field trips, the chairman began, but Howard interrupted. I think it's a reasonable request. We're making decisions that affect hundreds of lives. The least we can do is look those people in the eye before we do it. A tense silence followed. Alexander waited, his father's watch ticking steadily on his wrist, marking the moments that would determine not just his fate, but the future of his father's legacy. Alexander sat alone in his office, the board meeting adjourned without a vote. Howard's intervention had bought him 72 hours. The board would visit the community center tomorrow, then reconvene for the confidence vote. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Victoria stood in the doorway, her usual confident demeanor slightly diminished. May I come in? She asked, uncharacteristically hesitant. Alexander gestured to a chair, his expression guarded. Planning your first moves as CEO, Victoria didn't deny her ambitions. I've always been transparent about wanting to lead this company someday. Transparent? Is that what you call secretly coordinating with Hemsworth behind my back? She placed a thick folder on his desk. Before you judge my actions, I think you should see this. Alexander opened the folder to find financial records from Morgan Innovation's early years, his father's era of leadership. I was preparing my transition plan, Victoria explained. I wanted to understand the company's complete financial history to present to the board. What I found surprised me. Alexander flipped through the documents, noting his father's handwritten annotations in the margins. Growth charts spanning 3 decades revealed a pattern he hadn't noticed before. During your father's tenure, Victoria continued, the company had lower quarterly peaks, but significantly more sustainable long-term growth. The volatility increased dramatically after we shifted to our current profit-focused model. She pointed to a comparison chart she'd created. Our shareholder returns were actually more reliable under your father's community-centered approach, just over a longer horizon. Short-term investors didn't see the benefits, but long-term holders did extremely well. Alexander studied her with newfound curiosity. "Why are you showing me this? It contradicts everything you've been advocating." Victoria straightened her shoulders. "Because I want to lead this company someday, but I want it to be worth leading. When I do, the path we've been on leads to short-term gains and long-term instability." She hesitated. "I didn't understand what your father built until I saw these numbers. The community investments weren't charity. They were strategic foundation building that created sustainable growth." Alexander leaned back, processing this unexpected development. "You argued forcefully against the Lemonade Initiative." "I argued based on incomplete information," Victoria admitted. "These records weren't in our digital systems. They were in the physical archives Eleanor helped me locate. Eleanor knew about this. She suggested I might find the research educational." A hint of a smile touched Victoria's lips. "I believe she called it seeing the bigger picture." Alexander couldn't help but chuckle. Eleanor, his father's loyal assistant, had played her own strategic move. "So what now?" he asked. "You've orchestrated a board coup that's still in motion." Victoria's expression turned serious. "I can help you stop it, but we need to present a united front with a modified plan. One that balances your community vision with more immediate business metrics the board can embrace." "You're proposing an alliance." "I'm proposing a compromise," Victoria corrected. "Your vision, tempered by practical execution, my financial discipline guided by sustainable principles." Alexander considered her offer. Victoria had been a formidable opponent. She could be an equally powerful ally. But trust, once broken, wasn't easily restored. "Why should I believe this isn't another strategic move to protect your position?" he asked. Victoria pointed to the financial records. "Because the numbers don't lie. Your father's approach works. It just requires patience and conviction to see it through. I want to be part of a company that builds lasting value, not just quarterly returns." She leaned forward. "I still want to be CEO someday, Alexander. I'm not pretending otherwise, but I'd rather inherit a company with a soul than an empty shell with good short-term numbers." Alexander studied her, searching for signs of deception. Instead, he found something unexpected, a genuine respect that hadn't been there before. "We have 72 hours to save your job and the initiative," Victoria said pragmatically. "The board visit tomorrow is critical, but it won't be enough without a business case they can defend to shareholders." "And you think we can build that case?" Victoria nodded toward the historical records. "Your father already did. We just need to translate his wisdom into terms today's board will understand." Alexander extended his hand across the desk. "Let's get to work." Morning light streamed through the conference room windows as Alexander and Victoria refined their presentation. They'd worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a shared determination that surprised them both. "The historical performance data is compelling," Victoria said, reviewing their slides. "But we need something more immediate to counter the current stock dip." Alexander nodded. "The board visits the community center this afternoon. That experience will help, but you're right. We need stronger financial arguments." Eleanor entered with fresh coffee and a stack of papers. "I found those customer loyalty statistics you requested," she told Victoria, "and the community investment correlation data from the first 15 years. "Eleanor, how long have you been sitting on these archives?" Alexander asked. A smile touched her lips. "Your father asked me to keep them safe until they were needed. Again, I believe that time has come." As Eleanor left, Alexander's phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "We're prepared for the board visit," she reported. "The grant recipients will be here to share their stories, and the center will be full of activity. But Lucy wanted me to ask if she could bring her lemonade stand." Alexander smiled. "Tell her it's essential to the presentation." After hanging up, he noticed Victoria studying him with an inscrutable expression. "What?" he asked. "I'm trying to..." Reconcile the Alexander Morgan I've known for years with the man who's excited about a child's lemonade stand being part of a major corporate strategy. Perhaps you're seeing the real version, he suggested, the one that got buried under quarterly targets and acquisition metrics. They returned to their preparation, crafting a revised mission statement that honored the company's roots while embracing its future. By mid-morning, they had distilled James Morgan's lengthy community covenant into a single powerful paragraph. Morgan Innovations creates sustainable value by investing in the communities we serve, developing the people we employ, and delivering products that improve lives. Our success is measured not just in quarterly returns, but in the lasting impact we create for all stakeholders. Victoria studied the statement. The board will need to see how this translates to shareholder value. That's where your analysis comes in, Alexander replied, pointing to the comparative growth charts she'd created. Show them that my father's approach wasn't just idealistic, it was good business. They spent the remaining hours preparing for every possible objection. Victoria's financial expertise complemented Alexander's renewed vision, creating a strategy that addressed both community impact and business performance. At noon, they joined the board members for the community center visit. Alexander watched their expressions as Sarah led the tour, introducing them to program participants and showing the tangible results of the Lemonade initiative. Lucy had set up her stand in the center's entrance, offering free samples to the board members. Mr. Morgan taught me that giving samples builds customer loyalty, she explained earnestly to the chairman, who couldn't help but smile. The girl has business instincts, he admitted to Alexander. She also understands something we forgot, Alexander replied, that profit and purpose can coexist. Howard, the eldest board member, seemed particularly moved by the visit. James would be proud, he told Alexander quietly. This is exactly the kind of impact he always envisioned. As they prepared to leave, Michael Davis approached the group. I'm Lucy's father, he introduced himself to the board. Before you make your decision tomorrow, I wanted to share something. He described how the Lemonade initiative had helped him secure financing to expand his small contracting business. I've hired 4 people from the neighborhood, including 2 former Westridge employees. Next month, we're taking on our biggest project yet, renovating an affordable housing complex. And are you implementing the profit-sharing model? Victoria asked. Michael nodded. 20% of our profits go back to community projects. It's actually helped us win contracts. Clients appreciate the social impact. Back at Morgan Innovations, Tower, Alexander and Victoria made final adjustments to their presentation. The board visit had gone well, but tomorrow's vote remained uncertain. We should prepare for the worst, Victoria cautioned. Even with the community center visit, some board members seemed unmoved. Alexander nodded, turning his father's watch on his wrist. Then we'll just have to make the business case so compelling they can't ignore it. Your father would be good. At this moment, Victoria observed, inspiring people to believe in something bigger than quarterly profits. Perhaps, Alexander replied, but he also knew when to be practical. That's why we need your approach as much as his vision. They worked into the evening, 2 unlikely allies united by a shared determination to save not just Alexander's job, but the soul of the company itself. The boardroom felt different this morning. Tense, yet expectant, board members spoke in hushed tones as they took their seats, the previous day's community center visit still fresh in their minds. Alexander noted that several wore the small lemonade. Pin Lucy had given each visitor a handmade yellow circle with the words "Purpose plus Profit" written in careful letters. The chairman called the meeting to order. As agreed, we'll begin with Mr. Morgan's presentation, followed by the confidence. Vote and Westridge merger decision. Alexander stood, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about his job, it was about his father's legacy and the future of hundreds of employees and community members. Before I begin, he said, I want to introduce a key collaborator. Ms. Chen has been instrumental in developing the analysis I'm about to present. Surprise rippled through the room as Victoria joined him at the front. The board had expected them as adversaries, not allies. Yesterday, you witnessed the human impact of the Lemonade Initiative, Alexander began. Today, we'll demonstrate its business value. Victoria took over, presenting the historical financial analysis with precision. Under James Morgan's leadership, the company achieved a 17% average annual growth rate with significantly lower volatility than our current model. The difference? A balanced stakeholder approach rather than pure shareholder focus. She displayed charts comparing performance during different eras of the company. When we abandoned community investment, during our aggressive growth phase 5 years ago, our quarterly spikes increased, but so did our downturns. Our overall trajectory actually flattened. Alexander returned to the presentation. The Lemonade Initiative isn't charity, it's strategic foundation building in our communities. It creates an ecosystem of local businesses that become customers, partners, and talent pipelines. But the immediate stock impact, one board member began, is a short-term reaction to perceived uncertainty, Victoria finished. We've analyzed similar initiatives by other companies. Initial market hesitation is typically followed by stronger, more sustainable growth when the strategy demonstrates results. They presented their revised Westridge proposal next, maintaining the merger but restructuring it to preserve jobs and community infrastructure. The Westridge CEO has tentatively accepted this approach, Alexander revealed. It will reduce immediate cost savings, but create long-term value through community goodwill and expanded market presence. Howard nodded approvingly. This addresses both shareholder concerns and community impact. It's exactly the balanced approach James would have taken. The chairman seemed less convinced. Hemsworth Capital has made their position clear. They want immediate returns, not long-term promises. Actually, Victoria interjected, I spoke with Hemsworth's CEO this morning. After reviewing our analysis, they're willing to support a modified approach with conditions. She outlined Hemsworth's requirements, measurable quarterly milestones, regular impact reports, and a 2-year evaluation period for the full initiative. In other words, Alexander concluded, accountability without abandoning the vision. He then unveiled their revised company mission statement, explaining how it honored the founding principles while embracing modern business realities. This isn't about choosing between profit and purpose, he said. It's about recognizing that lasting profit comes from meaningful purpose. My father understood that. Lucy Davis, with her lemonade stand, understands that. And I believe this board understands that too. As he finished, silence filled the room. The chairman cleared his throat. This is certainly a more substantive proposal than I anticipated, he admitted, but the decision remains with the board. We'll now proceed to the confidence vote. Small paper ballots were distributed. Alexander and Victoria stepped outside. While the vote was conducted, waiting in tense silence. Whatever happens, Alexander said quietly, thank you for your support. Victoria nodded. Your father built something worth fighting for. I see that now. The chairman opened the door minutes later, his expression unreadable. We're ready for you. They returned to find the board seated solemnly around the table. 8 ballot cards lay in the center. The board has voted on the question of confidence in Alexander Morgan's leadership, the chairman announced formally. By a margin of 5-3, the board has expressed. Alexander held his breath. Its continued confidence in Mr. Morgan. As CEO, relief washed over him. Victoria squeezed his arm briefly, a small gesture of solidarity. Additionally, the chairman continued, the board has approved the revised Westridge merger plan and the continuation of the Lemonade Initiative, subject to the quarterly performance metrics outlined in your proposal. As the meeting concluded, Howard approached Alexander. It was closer than it should have been, the older man said, but your father would be proud of how you fought for his principles. Alexander nodded, his father's watch a comforting weight on his wrist. The real Work begins now, proving that purpose and profit truly can go hand in hand. 3 months after the board showdown, Alexander stood on a small stage, erected outside the West Side Community Center. Behind him, a large banner proclaimed the official launch of the Lemonade Fund, Community Partnerships for Sustainable Growth. Television cameras and reporters gathered to capture the moment. Lucy stood beside him, practically vibrating with excitement in her new yellow dress. Sarah and Michael watched proudly from the front row, alongside Victoria and several board members, including Howard. Today marks not just a new initiative, Alexander began, but a return to foundational values that built Morgan Innovations. The Lemonade Fund represents our commitment to creating sustainable growth through community investment. He gestured to the newly expanded community center. What had once been a modest facility now included additional classrooms, a business incubator space, and a commercial kitchen for food entrepreneurs. None of this would have happened without the inspiration of one determined young entrepreneur. Alexander continued, turning to Lucy, who reminded a corporate CEO that the best business models include giving back. Lucy stepped forward to enthusiastic applause. "I'm Lucy Davis, Chief Impact Officer of the Lemonade Fund," she announced with practiced confidence. The crowd chuckled at her self-appointed title, but Alexander had insisted it be made official, at least ceremonially. Lucy continued with impressive poise for an 11-year-old. "When I started my lemonade stand, I decided to save half my profits for the community center because that's what good businesses do. Now Mr. Morgan's big company is doing the same thing." Her simple explanation of complex corporate social responsibility earned warm laughter and applause. After the ceremony, Alexander mingled with community members and grant recipients. The initiative had already funded 37 local businesses, each committed to the profit-sharing model Lucy had inspired. Preliminary data showed promising results: new jobs, increased economic activity, and growing community engagement. Victoria approached with a tablet displaying real-time stock information. "Up 12% since we announced the expanded program," she noted. "The analysts are starting to understand our strategy." "And Hemsworth Capital?" Alexander asked, cautiously supportive. Their quarterly review praised our innovative approach to community-based market development. Victoria's lips twitched with amusement. "Corporate speak, for it's actually working." The Westridge merger had proceeded under the revised plan. Instead of closing the local facility, Morgan Innovations had transformed it into a manufacturing innovation center, preserving most jobs while creating new opportunities for local suppliers. Later that afternoon, Lucy's class gave a presentation about entrepreneurship, with Lucy proudly explaining how her lemonade business model had evolved. "Now I have stands at 3 locations," she told the audience, displaying her handwritten business plan: the community center, the park, and outside Morgan Innovations Tower. "And I have 2 employees, my friends Zoe and Marcus." She pointed to her growth chart. "This summer, we've made $412, which means 206 for the community fund!" Alexander watched with undisguised pride. In Lucy, he saw echoes of his younger self, the enthusiasm and vision he'd once had before quarterly targets and shareholder demands had narrowed his perspective. After the presentations, Sarah joined Alexander near the refreshment table, where Lucy was serving her signature lemonade. "She's been invited to speak at her school's career day," Sarah told him. "Apparently, several kids have started their own small businesses with the same 50-50 model. The next generation of community-minded entrepreneurs," Alexander observed. Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "When Lucy first set up her stand outside your building, I worried you were exactly the kind of corporate executive who'd ignore a child's small business. I've never been happier to be wrong." 3 months ago you would have been right, Alexander admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by Victoria, who approached with an elegantly dressed woman. "Alexander, this is Catherine Westridge, CEO of Westridge Technologies." The woman extended her hand. "Mr. Morgan, I've been watching your lemonade initiative with interest. Our merger has progressed more smoothly than I anticipated, given the restructuring. The community-focused approach has benefits beyond the balance sheet," Alexander replied. Catherine nodded. "I've noticed. In fact, I'm interested in implementing something similar at our other facilities. Perhaps we could discuss a broader partnership." As they exchanged contact information, Alexander caught sight of Lucy earnestly explaining her business model to a group of curious adults. Her expression, passionate, determined, visionary, reminded him powerfully of his father during Morgan Innovation's early days. The company was finding its way back to its roots, guided by the wisdom of its founder and the unexpected inspiration of a child with a lemonade stand. 1 year later, rain once again pounded against the windows of Morgan Innovation's tower. Alexander watched the droplets race down the glass, remembering the downpour that had changed everything 12 months ago. His office had transformed along with his leadership style. The imposing mahogany desk had been replaced with a round table that encouraged collaboration. Photographs of community projects lined the walls alongside business achievements. His father's worn desk occupied a corner, no longer merely decorative, but used daily. Victoria entered with the annual report. "Final numbers for the first year of the Lemonade Initiative," she announced, "ready for tomorrow's board presentation." Alexander scanned the highlights. Stock price up 23% year over year, employee retention improved by 30%, and community sentiment metrics at an all-time high. Most importantly, the 75 businesses launched through the Lemonade Fund had created over 300 local jobs. "The board will be pleased," he noted. "Even the skeptics have come around." "Success has a way of changing minds," Victoria replied. She'd grown into her role as Chief Strategy Officer, balancing financial discipline with the company's renewed community focus. Their unexpected alliance had evolved into a formidable partnership. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Annual Lemonade Stand Championship today at 4 p.m. Lucy says your presence is required." Despite the rain, Alexander left the office early. His priorities had shifted. Meetings could be rescheduled, but promises to 11-year-old entrepreneurs couldn't. The Westside Community Center hummed with activity. What had begun as Lucy's simple lemonade stand had evolved into a youth entrepreneurship program with 30 participants, each running their own small businesses with the 50-50 profit-sharing model. Lucy's enterprise had grown impressively. Lucy's legendary lemonade now operated from a professional cart with a colorful awning. She had expanded to 5 flavors and added homemade cookies to her product line. 3 classmates worked as part-time employees. "Mr. Morgan," she called. Spotting him, "You're just in time to judge the pitch competition." The gymnasium had been transformed into a showcase of youth businesses. Children ages 8 to 15 presented everything from pet care services to handcrafted jewelry, each proudly displaying their community contribution plans. As Lucy guided him through the exhibits, Alexander noticed a magazine photographer capturing the event. Next month's Business Leader would feature a cover story on the Lemonade Initiative's first year, a far cry from the Businessman of the Year issue that had once gathered dust on his credenza. "There's someone I want you to meet," Lucy said, pulling him toward a quiet corner. An elderly man with kind eyes stood watching the activities. "This is my grandpa," Lucy introduced proudly. "He came all the way from Florida to see my business." "Lucy tells me you're the one who understood her vision," the man said, shaking Alexander's hand. "Not many CEOs would take business advice from a 10-year-old. "Best decision I ever made," Alexander replied sincerely. As the event concluded, rain continued to fall outside. Lucy appeared with 2 umbrellas. "Mom says we should walk you back to your office. I want to show Grandpa where I started my first stand." The three generations walked through the rain, Lucy chattering excitedly, her grandfather asking thoughtful questions about her business plan. Alexander mostly listened, enjoying their enthusiasm. As they approached Morgan Innovations' tower, the rain intensified. Lucy stopped at the exact spot where her lemonade stand had stood a year ago. "This is where it all began," she announced to her grandfather. "Mr. Morgan came down in the rain to buy my lemonade, and he saw my phone wallpaper with his picture. And then everything changed." Alexander smiled at her simplified version of events. In many ways, it captured the essence perfectly. "Let's take a picture here," Lucy suggested, pulling out her phone. As they huddled under the umbrellas, Alexander noticed Lucy's phone wallpaper had changed. Instead of the old charity event photo, it now displayed a picture of Lucy, Sarah, Michael, and himself at the Lemonade Fund launch. "Say lemonade," Lucy directed as she held up the phone. "Lemonade," they chorused, rain falling around them. Later that evening, Alexander changed his own phone wallpaper for the first time in years. He selected the photo Lucy had just taken, three generations, standing in the rain, smiling despite the downpour, at the exact spot where a child's simple business model had reminded a successful CEO about what truly matters. The circle was complete. And like the best business models, it was sustainable, built to grow, and designed to last.